before I'm going to go ahead and record this. We're very honored today to have Dr. Brenda Pogendorf with us to talk about enrollment management. Brenda is the Vice President for Enrollment and Admissions at Financial Aid at Roanoke College. She served in undergraduate enrollment management for 36 years, first at Roanoke, then at Carthage, and then came back to Roanoke. Not only has she worked there, but served as a consultant for a number of colleges and universities. Her bachelor's is from Roanoke. She has 2 masters. One's from Hollins University and an MBA and a PhD in education leadership and policy from Loyola University Chicago. Brenda, I really like this comment on your dissertation on student persistence in college. I mean, oh my gosh, talk about a topic that we all need to know about. So I thought that was pretty slick. She really likes and enjoys the art and science of recruiting and retaining students. She has a daughter who is a Thrivent Fellow alum. And Brenda, by the way, when you get a minute, send her my email.
I will.
That we can get her on. We now have a members only area on the website. And I think she might enjoy some of the things on that. On that note, I'm going to pass leadership, the host, to Brenda to begin our webinar. Brenda?
All right.
Okay. You are the host.
Okay, let's see. Oh, it's not working. Okay, let's see if this does it. This is the first time I've used Zoom, so bear with me here. All right, is that good? Can you see it?
It's all good.
All right, so I could spend all day talking about these ideas and these thoughts, so I'm trying to give you just the high-level view of enrollment management, and I know I'm not the only one in the room who knows about these things, so I'm hoping that that you will chime in along the way with questions or comments, especially Bobby and Adam. I think you're the only 2 enrollment people out there. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so chime in as you like to, please. I'm trying to give you an overview so that you, from wherever you sit on a college campus, you can maybe know some better questions to ask and things to look for as you're working with your enrollment colleagues. So thank you for that wonderful introduction, by the way, and thank you for letting me be here today. I want to say just a little bit about my background in a different way. I have worked primarily with small private liberal arts colleges, though and most of them have been ELCA, in fact, but not all. And I've been a part of two campuses at a time when enrollment was a real issue. I would say maybe in its infancy, enrollment management was in its infancy. Both with my first round at Roanoke, we really had some enrollment issues. We're trying to rev them up. And then at Carthage, when Greg Campbell had just arrived as president, they were in a declining enrollment situation. So I was asked to come in and get that turned around. My return to Roanoke has been really a bit different because it's a much more mature operation under the leadership of Mike Maxey for many years. It was in pretty good shape. So I had a very strong foundation to build on. So I'm just acknowledging that there are times when you're in more of a triage situation and times when you're in a building on the strength of the past situation. So it's important to be aware of those 2 things. I am going to go through, this is the agenda, just talking about the profession a little bit more. I don't know how much you know about the recruitment process, so I'll give you a brief primer on that and some of the language that we use, things to watch for. And then talk a little bit about the disruptive factors that we all face right now in higher education that affect our enrollments big time. Pricing, marketing, promotion. So we'll go through these one by one. What I want to leave you with is kind of what metrics should you be watching, asking about if you're not already, and what qualities might be desirable in your chief enrollment leader on your campus. So I have really seen enrollment management change over the years that I've been a part of it. I would say we've gone in large part from being gatekeepers, where we sort of opened the mail, and we did work to get our recruitment to get our classes, but we were in more of a who should we let in kind of a question, rather than trying really hard to get people to look at us the way that we are now. So it's become much, much more complex. In many ways, I see what we do in admissions as being matchmakers, because part of our job is to take the students who are interested and match them up with people on campus that can pique and spark their interest in a deeper way. Over the years, I've really seen the need for data analysis growing quite a bit as well. I think, jumping to the art and science, I think admissions is it relies a lot on data and knowing where we're going from where we've been and where we want to be, but also there's an intuitive piece to it that we have to act on as well. It's not one or the other. It's best if it's a combination of both. You know, when I started in admissions in 1982, admissions really controlled the communication to students. They would have to give us their name and address and phone number in order for us to give them information about our colleges. If they didn't, the only way they could get information about us really was if they knew someone or they wanted to go through the big books that we used to rely on. Now we are just a voice in the choir of where they're getting information, because they can get so much information without ever talking to us. And I'll say more about that in a little bit. We have gone from, in this time period, from really just talking about fit, student college fit, to fit and affordability. In admissions, when I started, we all pretty much met the need of our students 100%. So if their family contribution that was computed by the federal formula, it gave us a number and all the colleges met that number, it really had to be a fit decision, because there wasn't much differentiation in the cost. The differentiation was in the experience. And so we've really moved away from that, sadly so in some cases. So I want to talk just a little bit about the recruitment process. You've heard about the funnel, I'm sure. This is just a little bit of a different way of looking at it, but these numbers represent Roanoke's number. I encourage you to know what your numbers are on your campus if you don't already. But we start with about 250,000 students who we purchase their names in search through the college search process from College Board and others. We try to garner their interest by sending them emails and mailings. And then we get a prospect or an inquiry pool of about 30,000 or so. And then we try our best to convert those students into applicants. That's the conversion rate. And then we do our acceptances from that completed application group, and then yield from the accepted group into the deposited group. And as you can see from this, I'm sure you're aware of this, there is that thing called MELT. That means that not all the deposits we get end up in our freshman classes in the fall. So those are pretty standard terms. I'm sure you've heard them before. Most of them we don't have a lot of control over. We can influence, but we don't control them, except really for the acceptance rate. We do control that one. There are funnels within this that I won't get into, but just know that not all inquiries are the same. Not all applicants are the same. For example, a student who comes to us through the College Board, they sent us their board scores, is much more likely to come through and apply and be accepted than someone who we might have seen at a college fair. So there are funnels within the funnel and the ratios vary. These ratios of conversion and yield are amazingly stable over the years. They may have a trend in them, but they don't vary much from one year to the next. And I think that's true of most colleges. Another way of looking at this is balancing the three-legged stool. The stool may have more than three legs, but they need to be in balance. We typically talk about the number of students that we want to enroll, that number that the budget calls for, how much money we're willing to give them in terms of scholarship and aid, or you could look at that leg as net revenue, net tuition revenue, whichever way you want to look at it. And then the third one is in quality. Let me give you a couple of examples. If the leadership of the college decided that we wanted to have the biggest class ever and we wanted 700 students, no matter what, come in, and they said, we don't really care about the other two legs of the stool for now, we just want the number. We could do that. We could bring in 700 freshmen. They might have a discount rate larger than we'd like. they might not be of the academic quality that we really wanted, but we could get that number. Another scenario might be, and this happened at Roanoke a few years ago, that we want the highest quality class we can get. We're not so concerned about size or how much money we spend on scholarship, but we really are going after the quality. Mike Maxey did this in 2004 here, and we had 484 freshmen in that class. It was smaller than usual by 50 or so students, but they were very bright. We spent a lot in scholarships because bright students want scholarships, and they have the highest graduation rates and persistence rates that the college has ever seen. So what I'm trying to point out is you can rebalance this however the leadership wants to, but there are consequences for the other ones. Most colleges I know of want all three of those in equal proportion, and that's the challenge of it. Questions about that? There may be other legs. Diversity may be another leg in balance, whether that's geographic or ethnic, racial diversity. There may be other pieces to this as well. Those aren't the only three. So have any of you read John McGee's book, Breakpoint? If you haven't, you might want to pick it up, and he doesn't pay me to say this, but I found it to be a fascinating book because he talks a lot about the demographic disruptions we're facing, economic and cultural, and I'll walk us through those, but it's going to sound a little bit like doomsday has hit us, and I don't mean for it to be that at all. I agree with what he says, that we need to find opportunity in this time of disequilibrium, because these factors will change, and there are some places we can go, perhaps capture something to move ahead in our reaching our goals. So, you know, John McGee is the Vice President for Enrollment and Strategic Planning, I think it is, at St. John's and St. Ben's in Minnesota, and he's had a lot of experience in this world as well. He's a fascinating guy if you ever get the chance to talk with him. So you've seen this before. This is the demographic disruption, and this is the overall number of high school graduates. And we all enjoyed, I think, growing enrollments during the mid-90s or early 90s up until about 2010 or so, when the number of students were plentiful and growing rapidly. And so we all capitalized on that. And then we hit this plateau, and we see some dips and peaks in it, but it's very different from what it was for the last 20 years or so. Doesn't mean there can't be winners. It just makes it much more challenging to get our classes. If you look below that a little bit more, you'll see that there are some real regional differences. Many colleges ran to recruit in the Northeast because there were so many high ability to pay students. And that has been a good strategy, but it's becoming an increasingly difficult strategy because they're one of the regions of the country being hit the most by this downturn in the number of high school graduates. The Midwest is among that group as well, as is the West. The South is really, I mean, they're declining. They're going to decline in the next years, but not at the same rate as the other regions. And so we're seeing that, for example, in our applicant pool and prospect pool right now, since we are in their version of the Southeast or the South, we are seeing many more students coming to us from south of us rather than north of us. So I just want to make you aware of the fact that admissions offices are having to deal with these variations, and I hear more and more colleges putting admissions counselors who live in California or who live in Texas or who live in other areas in order to capitalize and to build a market in these growing areas as other areas that they may have a stronger foothold in begin to diminish. So looking at the ethnicity of the group, we know that that is changing as well. And we only see in the foreseeable future, we only see increases in Hispanic population and a bit in the Asian Pacific Islander group. The others are mostly declining. And so, as you know, Hispanic students, for example, may go to college at different rates than white students, for example. And so that presents this ethnic piece of it gives us some other challenges as well. So just to kind of highlight a few things, there are fewer high school students to fill our classrooms and residence halls out there. And the population shifts mean we have to move around and be more nimble in where we're recruiting. And it's hard to go into a brand new territory and immediately have name recognition. It takes a long time to build that. So that's a challenge we have to deal with as well. Many of us have tried to rely on international student growth to fill the decline in the domestic students. That was a good idea maybe until a couple of years ago, but that population is getting tougher to bring in. It was down nationally 7% this fall. So that I don't see that helping us fill the gaps right now, maybe in a few years, but not at the moment. And then.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm sorry. In regards to international students, down 7% in 17, what's the forecast? Is there talk out there?
I am seeing information that just says that we're probably going to see that students are simply looking. I read something the other day that said they're looking at New Zealand and Australia and Canada rather than the United States right now.
Is that more so due to political climate here?
Political climate, yeah. They don't feel like it's as friendly to come here as it was a few years ago.
Thanks.
Doesn't mean it's gone entirely, it just means it's not as plentiful as it was.
Sure, right.
If you overlay the income levels and college preparation rates on these different populations, whether you look at it geographically or you look at it racially, you couple that with the sheer number of high school graduates, the challenge gets to be even greater because we all want more of the students who can pay more and who are looking to go to colleges like ours. I won't ask this question of you to answer. You don't have to answer this, but I wonder how many of your college strategic plans call for enrollment growth. I know ours does. Most colleges I talk to, they're all looking to grow their enrollment. I haven't heard anybody say they're looking to shrink their enrollment. Maybe some are looking to hold it, but it's going to be impossible for us all to grow in this market. There will be winners and there will be losers, but we cannot all grow. Any thoughts on that? I'll move on to the economic disruption then. You know,
Brenda, Tom, real quick, that's a really, really great question in terms of we all can't grow. I mean, there is a finite pool of potential students. So it seems to me that we get into this kind of competitive discount rate thing that, you know, where any comments on that? I mean, what do you see if your discount's too high, strategies to get it lower? Are we living in a world of better than 50% discount rate and we can't do anything about it? Any thoughts on that?
I think we are living in a world of high discount rates, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but because I think that may be the wrong piece to look at. We all talk about discount rates, but I would flip it to talk about net revenue instead of the discount rate. But it's awfully hard in this competitive market to bring discount rates down. It can be done, but it's hard.
Yeah. And another question that's interesting is we all live within a particular community, right? Whatever size that community, it may be a very local city, it may be part of a state, it may be a region. But how do you see that playing out? I mean, obviously, we just saw your charts about what high school graduation rates look like in the absolute numbers of those populations. But how do you see, you know, sort of us being local versus national, you know, some of those questions? How do you shape and where you look at Roanoke?
Well, the vast majority of students go within 200, 250 miles from home to go to college. So, you know, I loved it when I worked at Carthage and we were right next to Chicago. There were a lot of people in our 200-mile radius. Looks a little bit different here at Roanoke, though, you know, not to say, again, that can't be done. I do think that where you are, location has a lot to do with how successful you can be. We are, for example, trying to do more in California, and that's a long trip across the country. And especially with students like Hispanic students, they're not going to go that far away from home. They usually stay pretty close to home. So you have to put those pieces together, your location and what the population base around you is like. We have a hard time, for example, getting Hispanic students to come from Northern Virginia. That's still in state, but it's 3.5 hours away.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
So most families agree that a college education is what they want for their children, but they're worried about how they're going to pay for it. We all know family incomes haven't kept pace with the rising college costs, and there's a lot of conversation about that and whether the college costs should be increasing at the rates they are. I'm not going to say anything about that, but the majority of students entering college have no savings to bring to the table, which is just really kind of an amazing thing. Somehow most families think it's up to the colleges to help them find a way. So the other piece that's important that has changed recently is that after the recession, many families are reluctant to borrow money, and they don't want their students to borrow even this Stafford loans. And so they're saying to the colleges, can you give me, everything needs to be in a grant or a scholarship because we don't want to borrow. They've heard so much about the loan situation that's in the media that they don't want their children to even come out of college with the $27,000 of the Stafford federal loans. I think that's a sad thing. I think it's a good thing for students to be invested in their own education and to pay. That's not an unreasonable amount to borrow. But we're seeing more and more families who don't want to do that. I also have wondered, since the economy changed, how many families were borrowing home equity to pay for college. There's no way to really, I haven't seen any way of measuring that, but I think it was happening quite a bit. And when home equities changed, families didn't have that as a resource anymore. And I think some families were sort of counting on that as the way they would get their kids through college. So all these things have changed. So it makes it harder for the families of little or lesser means, let me put it that way. And the families who can pay the close to or the full sticker price are so often interested in just looking for that best deal and shopping around for the college that would give their student the best deal. And so it's really disrupted. You can't assume that families who have the means are willing to pay. So the willingness and the ability factors are really playing a role right now in our working with students. Thoughts or questions about that? Okay, I'll go on.
This is Adam. Do you guys talk a lot at all? I mean, sure you do, and think about what that sticker price does in terms of kind of younger students that are just starting in families, 7th, 8th, 9th grade families that are starting to think about college. And we talk to a lot of families who have ruled us out early on, but then maybe come back to the table later. But when you have those conversations, that there are a lot of people that ruled you out that didn't come back. And so how you manage that, or if you're doing anything with young teens to talk about pricing.
I'm not sure if this will answer your question exactly, but we had a pricing study done at Roanoke a couple of years ago, and they told us what we already knew, that our published price scared a lot of people away, and the parents didn't even want their children to look at us because they didn't want them to like us and then be disappointed later if they couldn't make it happen. They couldn't comprehend how it would happen.
Yep.
So they were walking away and never getting into our inquiry pool in the beginning. When the Stevens group who did our study looked at the net price, both students and parents felt a lot more comfortable and felt like, wow, this is really doable, even though the sticker price scared them. And so we've been having conversations about how do we move that net price up sooner in the process so that families can get some comfort about the fact that they may be able to afford this, and they can spend more time talking about fit issues and experience issues.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you. The price of our colleges, for the most part, are scaring the public. And unless we can figure out a way to, either lower prices or give them their net price sooner, it will affect the size of our inquiry pools.
Right. Yep.
Is that where you were going?
Yeah, we don't have any answers, but we all kind of see it getting worse and worse?
We've done some targeted price resets. We went to Maryland. We saw Maryland was a little bit lower than in enrollment than we had seen in years past. So last year we went to our neighbors of the north and gave them a Maryland, an old state line grant that we put way early in the funnel and just said, because you're from Maryland and we like our neighbors to the north, you have this $5,000 Maryland scholarship in addition to any merit awards you might receive. And we saw immediately the increase picked up, the applications picked up, and we did enroll more students. And as you know, Adam, especially, that most of those dollars that we gave them, we would have given them anyway when we got to the need-based piece. It was just given earlier and therefore gave them greater hope to get in the process with us.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, Brenda, Tom again. This question about tuition reset is really an interesting question. I like your point about helping families and students understand earlier what the real number is, the net. What do you think about either a small, like you've done up in Maryland, or a major tuition reset?
We've talked a little bit about that on our campus, and we're really holding back on a wholesale tuition reset because there are downsides to doing that. It's a marketing challenge for one thing, but there's also out there that, you know this, I'm sure, that if it costs more, it must be better quality thought. And so we aren't willing to go there yet. We're trying to do some other partial resets and see how that works. We feel like if we do the partial resets based on any number of, in that case it was geography, but it doesn't have to be geography, we can control it and change it more easily than we could if we just did an across the board type of a reset.
So for clarification, when you say a partial reset, the example that you gave in regards to folks from Maryland, that's how you would partially reset or offset the cost for those folks for that particular population?
Right. It's a reset for a part of the inquiry pool, not the whole pool.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm just wondering how crazy you think this is going to get. So from making up scholarships, you know, to another state because you're my neighbor, I don't know that it's a really far leap to think about using Groupon or, you know, Retail Me Not, only it'd be like academic, you know, Me Not or whatever, and posting things to encourage people to grab on as if it's limited in supply and there's a time frame and then they commit and you've got people coming in. Do you think we're going to move in that direction?
You know, there are some crazy things going on out there. I've not heard that, but I wouldn't be surprised because I'm seeing I saw something recently. If you applied to a certain college by a certain date, you got free room and board.
Yeah.
And, you know, just kind of, I guess I'd kind of almost call some of those things gimmicky. But so maybe the Groupon thing's not that far off. I don't know.
I mean, it's gimmicky, but it's also what people are used to. This is the model that takes place every day in retail that people have become accustomed to. And I think it would be a model that's easy enough to move over in many ways that I wouldn't be surprised if it worked.
That's an interesting idea. You know, I was going to say this later, but I'll say it now. It used to be before the reauthorization in the early 90s, and I don't know if you're all aware, but in the early 90s, they greatly changed the methodology for determining financial need for families. And before that change happened, we were all meeting need 100%. And some colleges, the higher up colleges, I'll say, were giving some scholarships, but for the most part, we were all meeting need 100%. When that reauthorization hit and the formula changed, I remember being at a meeting in Atlanta with a bunch of colleagues, and we said, what are we going to do now? Because, for example, I was at Carthage at the time, and the new definition of need on the students we had just enrolled, the freshmen we had just enrolled on our campus, would have cost us $1.5 million more to enroll if we met their new need. And that was in the 1990s. And we said, we can't afford to do that anymore. So we all started going in different directions in how we were going to try to get awards to families. That whole change really, and the proliferation of merit scholarships at that point that we all are so deeply into now really came as a result of that federal change. I hate to say this, but I've been saying it for a few years. I think that something happening at the federal level is going to cause us all to go in another direction sometime down the road. I don't know what it is, and I'm not saying I want it to happen, but I just think that's probably in our future. So,
Brenda, can I ask a question? This is Sonia at Augsburg. Are you in conversations, or do you experience any differences between institutions like our ELCA and LCMS places, maybe the Jesuits, et cetera, that talk about this in a different way, or is there an ethic that is that comes into play in some of these decisions that sets us apart from the industry, so to speak?
I don't. Are you asking if the ELCA colleges and the Lutheran colleges as a whole are different, or colleges are different?
I guess if there's, if you catch wind of any of those conversations that says, let's not have the discount rate, or let's be more transparent, or is there something about our Lutheran identity or Jesuit identity that that says we're going to do something a little bit differently because of our values?
I've been around a lot of conversations, but I haven't been around many decisions in that regard, and we do have to be careful that we don't do something that looks like price collusion. But the conversation about transparency certainly is out there, but it's hard in this environment to be the only college or one of a few colleges doing something remarkably different. We've taught the public, for example, that merit scholarships are the way that we tell them how much we value what they bring to us. And so if you readjust it so that we don't give them a merit scholarship, then we don't love them as much as other people do. I've heard that conversation before, even if the bottom line looks better. So it's a really complex discussion. I hear a lot of discussion. We have meetings all the time with the ELCA colleges and others, and not a lot of decisions. So maybe we'll get there. Let me move to the whole pricing issue. You know, we are all in this high price, high discount rate game. I want to caution us, though, about focusing on discount rate only. And we've tried to teach our board in the last few years not to look at discount rate, but to look at net tuition revenue. And I've just given you a little simple explanation. I don't mean to offend you. This is very simplistic, but you know, if they're focused on, if board members, for example, are focused on a high discount rate is a terrible thing, then that college that's costs $40,000 in tuition is giving a 50% discount rate is considered somehow bad in the market. Whereas the college that's charging $20,000 and has a much more desirable discount rate of 35%, I'd take the net revenue of $20,000 any day, even though the discount rate is higher. So I think we need to re-educate people on campus as well as our boards about which number do we really want to look at. And maybe you're looking at it already that way. But the last thing I wanted to mention about pricing is, it really isn't pricing, but the Pell, I'll call it the Pell creep. You know, with the changing population, we, for example, have seen a large increase in the number of students eligible for Pell grants on our campus. The leadership didn't sit down 20 years ago and say, hey, our goal is to have 28% of our students be Pell recipients. It just sort of crept that way. But we are having conversations, and I encourage all campuses to have this conversation of, do you have a cap on what you want that number to be? Do you feel comfortable with it being in a certain range, or do you just let it float to wherever it happens to be? Because that does go hand in hand typically with your discount rate or your net tuition revenue. So I just bring it up as a conversation piece on your campuses. So we talked a little bit about this earlier. You know, typically before the financial aid process changed last year, we could not give families their actual price until late in the year, in March or so. And many of our boards didn't decide tuition and fees until February. So we were getting to the very end of the game before a family would know exactly what it cost. With the FAFSA changes that occurred last year, now we can give the students their financial aid as early as October. And I've seen a lot of colleges move their making their decisions about tuition and fees up into the fall or even the spring prior to that, so that we can give families that information earlier on and add them to your point so they don't cross us off the list too early on. There are colleges, I have heard conversation about trying to move that up even more into the applicant or maybe even inquiry stage, trying to help people get a sense of price earlier. So the cultural disruption, again, we've heard all these things. Higher education is so often seen as a commodity, that people don't understand the liberal arts and they're skeptical about it. Can you really get a job? How does your major tie to your career? And all of those things that people read about and hear about. And if the families are coming, students are coming from families where parents don't have a college education, they really don't understand all of this. Add to that the technology, you can get your degree online and stay home and all of those things. People think college rankings are done by some independent group that goes around and audits all of us and that they're the be all end all, and we know that they're not. Sweetbriar had one of the best student to endowment ratios ever a few years ago. That was not necessarily a good thing for them, but in the U.S. News and World Report rankings, they got points for that. That helped add to their ranking, the ranking score. So, families don't understand that they need to be aware of what that means. And then all the web-based ratings that students can do, and others can just put whatever they want out about colleges. We had a situation at a student panel recently where someone, I don't even know what it was, but one of the mothers in the group was sort of pounding our students on the fact that she had seen that Roanoke had an F rating on safety on campus. And the students on the panel were just shocked because they feel incredibly safe. That's one of the things Roanoke's kind of known for, and Salem for that matter. But this mother had seen one report on some rating out there, and in her mind, that was it. We weren't telling the truth, and the ratings were fact. And that's a scary thing when if they think everything on the web is fact. So I do sound like doomsday, but we've got the convergence of all of these disruptions going on. And not only is it getting the number of students a challenge, but the ones that are prepared to meet the academic rigor on our campuses and who can pay at the levels we desire to have them pay. There is just intense competition for students right now. It gets worse every year, as you probably know. So we have to find, I'll end that part of the discussion saying there are places to watch and things we can do to still get our classes in the midst of these headwinds that we all face. And I'll come back to that in just a second. So let me talk a little bit about the metrics that if you're sitting somewhere around campus and not in the admissions office, although admissions people do watch these are the kinds of things you might want to ask about to know how your admissions operation is doing. So how are the inquiries? Are they up? Are they down? And beware that there are plenty of stealth applicants. Those are the people who are shopping, looking at our colleges, but they're not giving us their names, and so they're not in our inquiry pool, but they're definitely looking at us. That's a new phenomenon in recent years. I think easily 30% of applicants coming in right now are stealth, meaning we never heard about them, we never had their name before the day they applied. Applications, that's a great metric to watch, but be careful because not all applications are created equally. These fast apps that are so popular these days, they don't often complete. Students don't complete those in many cases. It doesn't help to have an application from a student if they never give you the supporting documentation that you need to make a decision. And that's why I would ask about completed applications. I have seen colleges that they were all excited because they had increases in applications, but they didn't have an increase in completed applications, so it was hard to get the acceptance pool that they wanted. Pay attention to how many people are filing the FAFSA and sending the results to you. if a family, most families are filing, some are not, but most are. And if they're filing and not sending you the results, they're basically telling you that you're not on their list anymore. You're not even making the cut. They can only send a certain number of colleges their financial aid information. And if you're not in that mix, then you'll never get the chance to give them their best award. Of course, acceptances is a good thing to watch. And then deposits, and you know about MELT. I think I would also be sure to ask about the net tuition revenue per student and what that trend is looking like. Is that going up or down? Many times when the size of the class goes up, the net tuition revenue per student might go down. There's a direct relationship there. So you want both. You can have the numbers without getting the revenue that you really wanted in your budget. So just to be aware of those hydraulics too. Adam, would you add anything to that, or Bobby?
You know, one thing that we have started to probably pay more attention to, we always know it's important, is campus visits. But I think really zeroing in on sort of some of the detail and how many times students visit, I think those are metrics. You know, we hardly, maybe other than international students, we only have maybe a couple other students that enroll without visiting.
Mm-hmm. You know, some campuses are also watching now the pings in a CRM system. We just went to one this year, and it's fascinating to watch what the students are doing. It's kind of creepy, but we can tell when they were on our website how long they spent on each page, how long did they look at the history major, how long did they look at the student life page, or whatever they looked at. And if they're not pinging at all, that means they're probably not with you to the degree you think they are. So there are a lot of variables that we can watch.
I would absolutely agree with, I mean, everything you said. I am especially grateful for this because one of our board members is on the phone with us right now, Tom. And, you know, I know that the board has been very concerned about our discount rate, and, you know, we do, like most colleges, extensive review and auditing of our, with a leveraging consultant and looking at that. And it is tough to get people to really look at the net revenue. I think it's also, though, we have to understand that as we set our merit scholarships, oftentimes we're looking at institutional fit and GPA, and there is some level where we don't have a control over that. So if we end up, recruiting a really great academic class, our scholarship is going up, but that's also a good thing. And that is something that happened to us. And so I think it's looking at a balance, and definitely making sure, I don't think any of us can really go into our board, our president, and say this is a situation and without a plan. We have to go in with a strategy, to improve that plan, or to what are we gonna do about that. And so I think the pressure on enrollment management is probably at its greatest that we've seen, because we aren't just bringing in that class, but we have to figure out how we're going to get around these national demographics that are really hitting us just square in the face right now.
Right. Well, and thank you. Those were some great points. Two things strike me on that. One is, I forgot to mention it earlier, as we look at the changing population that's coming our way, are we prepared for them in terms of not just admissions, and can we, do we put Hispanic people on our admission staff so that we're more, seen as more friendly, or we can talk to their parents because many of them don't speak English. We're talking about that. It's very difficult to recruit a student when we can't even talk to their parents. But what are we doing programmatically across campus to help be attractive to those students? It's not just what is admissions doing.
Right. I liked your one book about the liberal arts, because I think that parents really are reluctant to take out the loan. Students are reluctant, even they're much more educated than they sometimes appear, and in regards to the financial situation. And so having a degree that doesn't have in degree title the name of a job, like accounting, can be tough. That's a tough sell. So that's certainly something we're looking at.
That's good. The other thing you said that made me smile was President Maxey here often talks about, don't just bring me a diagnosis, but bring me a cure, so to speak. In other words,
Yeah.
don't just come and tell me what all of our problems are, but what are we going to do about it?
Right.
So going back to John McGee's book, I found, to me, this is the one of the most salient points of the whole book. He says that 98% of our organizational DNA is shared with our peer and competing institutions, and it's up to us to determine and articulate what the 2% point of difference is on our campus. And that goes directly into marketing. In fact, we used this very point last week as a centerpiece of our discussion with our strategic planning of the board and our marketing committee on the board to try to articulate what is our 2% difference and how are we articulating that well? How can we articulate it better? That's a pretty interesting concept. Any thoughts on that one? So it's up to leadership to really figure that out and make sure it's being pointed out. I think that's a great homework assignment for us.
I think it's important for our leadership to, I mean, we have to do this training better. I know I feel that that sense as well on my campus, but it is important that we take a really good look in the mirror at who we are and that differentiation, because we'll get excited about some buzzwords like, well, servant leadership, and not realize, if everybody's saying that, either we say that in a different way or we prove it in a different way. And so it's important to look around. It's important to know what your competitors are doing so you can say things, in a more pointed way. Right.
And we have to say it in a way that it's going to be valued and that it matters. And again, be able to articulate something about outcomes. I think we're called more and more to talk about outcomes and demonstrate outcomes for our students. So I'm going to go through this quickly, but to talk about ways to create demand. And my main point of this is that it is a combination of offices and people across campus that can feed into this, not just the admissions office. The promotions could also be called sort of admissions tactical kinds of things. How, to the extent we are successful in using things like early decision, or should we be test optional? Can we get more applicants or drive more applications if we're test optional? Or some colleges these days are now making admissions decisions on self-reported grades and scores. I can't get my head around that quite yet, but student just tells us what their self-reported grades and scores are and we're given an admissions decision. They're doing this in Iowa and Indiana that I'm aware of right now. Mm-hmm. That's a tactic for sure. The FAST app thing that we've heard about, things like visit incentives. Incentives, if you visit our campus, it's a financial piece that goes into the financial aid package, or an incentive for filing the FAFSA to do these things that we know matter and are help us enroll the student. There are many of those kinds of promotions. I wasn't trying to list them all, but my point here is that there are a lot of things we can do tactically in the admissions office, but it's really hard to tweak your way to higher enrollment. Those things will take you part of the way, but they're not going to take you all of the way in this environment. So we have to talk about marketing in a broader conversation and go back to that conversation about what is distinctive about our college. A couple of years ago, I read a web page to our board and said, what college do you think this is? And they said, oh, that's Roanoke for sure. Talked about student-faculty interaction and all these things. And I said, no, it's James Madison University up the road from us, and it's much larger. It's a very different type of an institution, but they're saying the same things we're saying. So if you're a student or a parent that's just embarking on this college selection process, how do you know the difference? We're all saying similar things. So how do we find what's distinctive in promoting it? And then who are we promoting it to? Just another thought, if you aren't already on this, your college website is the biggest marketing brochure, so to speak, that your campus has. Many of us still send out publications in written form with pictures, but our website is what they're looking at more than anything else. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that. you know, many campuses will get their website ready and they'll say, okay, it's good. And then it just stays that way because it's good. But it has to be dynamic. It has to be changing. And students don't want to come back and see the same pictures all the time or the same language all the time. So how do you keep that sense of institutional mission, but make it attractive? It is a recruitment tool. I just want to make sure of that. And do you know what your market position is? We use data. We ask students, all our students who are accepted, we receive and accept a student questionnaire every year. And one of the things we ask them to do is to rate us both on quality, perceived quality, and perceived cost against our competitors. And so we have longitudinal data on our market position vis-a-vis these other schools. And so it's really powerful to look at where, especially if you put them together, where they put us in the sphere. If you took a piece of paper and put quadrants on it and said one axis was cost and one was quality, perceived quality, where do they think you are? Not where do you think you are, but where do they think you are in the market out there? And there's some really interesting stuff out there. It's not always accurate, but it's what they think. So I don't know if your schools do it except a student questionnaire, but I would look at it. And then programs, we've been talking a lot about this on our campus recently and in terms of expanding enrollment, but we're always looking for academic programs that faculty can think through and add, particularly these days in the sciences. We just added public health last year, and so that's an example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. And co-curricular programs, we added swimming because we saw a market for it, and we didn't have a swim team for men and women, so that allowed us to recruit a number of new students who wouldn't have come here otherwise because they wanted to swim and we didn't have the program. And it was that we did a cost-benefit analysis and found that it wouldn't cost us an inordinate amount to do that, to add that program for the tuition and room and board dollars that we would recoup from it. So that should be a constant iterative process. And if you're not aware, you can go to places like NARCUA and College Board and look at what students coming in up the pipeline are telling us in terms of what they're looking for. And I know they change their minds, but it's interesting to look at the emerging trends of what kinds of majors and programs they're looking for, and trying to be an early adopter of those is the thing to do. But there's data out there to support those kinds of conversations. I always have to put this in because I'm a big proponent. Every year at our staff retreat, we talk about new things to do, and I always say we can't leave till we talk about at least 2 things we're going to stop doing. So we can't just keep adding new things, but knowing when to stop something as well. And I don't mean just in admissions, I mean in terms of college-wide programs. So one last thing about that area, keep in mind that if you're having enrollment challenges, there are many reasons, but is it because you have a brand issue or because you have an admissions issue? Let me give you an example. I saw one college one time, this goes back a ways because when we bought college board names back in those days, you actually got a tape reel with names on it. And so they would order the names, but they were always busy when they came, so they put them on the filing cabinet, and then sometimes they fell off and they were behind the filing cabinet and they forgot to ever get them out. So they missed the opportunity to tell all those students about the college. And then they missed their class because they didn't have people in the pipeline. That is definitely an admissions issue. That's an example of an admissions issue. A branding issue is something perhaps more subtle, means you're doing things really well, state of the art even, maybe in your admissions. It's all on target, but you've got some kind of questionable brand or fuzzy brand in the market. Sweetbriar, this is an extreme case again. I don't mean to pick on them, but they're up the road from us. They had a sort of a branding issue to recruit with a couple of years ago. There was a good side and downside to it, but there are different things that will cause enrollment issues, and I just encourage you to look at what's causing it. Is it one or both of these things? So this is almost the last part. Student persistence. I'll run you through this really quickly. This is what I did my doctoral work on, and I just found it fascinating. a couple of points I'll make. I used the ELCA data that was shared for so many years with the colleges, and it was comprehensive across the campus and just a wealth of information, and I missed that data. But I used it to determine which colleges among the ELCA I would visit for my case study on student persistence. And one of the points here, I'll just go to the next, whoops, let me go back again. Let me talk first about the, I'll come back to that in a second. Let me go first to the model that I used. I was thinking about Sandy Aston's model of inputs predicting outputs. And if you simply look at the inputs being student academic achievement and all those things in high school as a predictor for the outputs, you get a very linear, kind of non-multifaceted view of things. But if you take into account the environment and the impact of the environment, you then get into fit and experience issues. And so I looked at all the ELCA colleges for a 10-year period, and I plot them first to second year retention rates, which were known. And then I used percent in the top 10% because that was the best academic qualifier that I had. So I used, that was my attempt at an academic qualifier. So I looked at all of those colleges and compared their academic profile in a way to their retention rates from first to second year. And if you take that middle line as being any colleges above the line are performing above the expectations given who they enrolled, and all the colleges below the line, you would have expected a stronger retention rate than they achieved. So I chose 3 colleges that were consistently and significantly above the line, meaning that they were consistently and significantly achieving higher first to second year retention rates than you would expect given who was coming to their campus. U.S. News and World Report also calculates this, and you get points if you have a gap between what was predicted and what you achieved. So it's a metric that's used. So I visited the 3 campuses, and I talked with students who had moved to their second year. I talked with faculty who taught primarily second year or first year students, and I talked with academic affairs and student affairs people to see what they thought was happening in the environment that drove that higher than expected retention rate. And this is one of the quotes that I got. I'll share a couple of my high level findings with you, but I love this. Someone said, be intentional about student success rather than retention. Retention is the byproduct of focusing on students and their success. It's not the focus of what we should be doing. And I thought, that's, we lose sight of that sometimes. And the other part was, how do we create a culture in which people view themselves as practitioners on a daily basis of student success, that everybody on these campuses seemed to be focused on how they could contribute to student success from their perch. And so fit and culture of community were the 2 things that came out in the top of the findings. I was really surprised by the fit. A lot of people said admissions had done a great job of bringing the best fit students to the campus, and that was not what I was expecting at all. But when I dug a little bit deeper on what that meant, they were really clear on what their campus offered and getting students to align their expectations with the reality on that campus through many visits and all the other things that we do. I know we all try to focus on this fit, but somehow this was happening just better than usual on these campuses. The other part was about just knowing your campus and not trying to be all things to all people. I think we slip into that sometimes, and we ought to say what we're good at and sometimes say what we don't do or we're not trying to be good at, and to stay the course rather than trying to you want to be nimble, but you also don't want to just run in every direction that the market seems to take you all the time. And I'm sure you know this, but creating that kind of iterative process where you improve something. I looked at policies, practices, and procedures of things that happen on campus. So you take something you think needs to be fixed, you improve it, you evaluate it, you assess it, you change it some more so you keep getting it right. But again, it's a continuous process and not, we've got it. We're there now. That's just a quick high level. Since we're running out of time here, I want to just go quickly through these last two things. My counterpart, Carl Stumo at Concordia University in Minnesota, presented this at the ELCA conference earlier in January. This was his doctoral work, and he took the core competencies that the Association for American College Registrars and Admissions Officers put together as being important. And he took those competencies to to the college presidents, to chief financial officers, chief academic officers, chief student affairs officers, chief marketing officers, and asked them what they thought were the most important competencies, and then asked them how they felt the people on their campus were doing on those competencies, the ones they were performing the highest in. And so the three most important competencies were change management. They thought that being able to manage change was number one in what you would want in a chief enrollment officer. I would agree with that one. Professional integrity and interpretation and application of institutional and external data. I love data. I think we need to drive so much of what we do. But then when they were asked, okay, what do you see your enrollment people excelling at? Professional integrity came number one, interpersonal abilities was two, and then reporting progress toward enrollment goals was three. So they didn't quite line up with what they thought were the most important. In fact, the gap scores, as you look down the bottom of this page, the biggest difference between what they thought was important and what they saw happening, change management was the biggest gap, and the use of data was the second, and then developing the enrollment mix. I just give you that as a way to think about if you're in a position at some point of hiring enrollment management people, what kinds of things you might look for, and you could find that whole list on the ACRO website. So open to more discussion. It's a field for being nimble and being thick-skinned, I'll tell you that.
Brenda, this is Sonia again. I have a question. Out of your expertise on more than one campus and consulting, if you could change a couple of sacred cows in higher education that would address the emerging dramatic shift in demographic change, what would a couple of those be?
I think I would want us to be more nimble. I know admissions offices often drive other parts of the campus crazy because we seem to do things on the fly, and we need to do it. You know, we think of it this morning and we need to implement it this afternoon. And I get that that's frustrating sometimes, but I think we need to be that way often. I sometimes wish that the rest of the campus could be a little bit more nimble like that. I mean, I understand how academia works, but if we want to change or add a major, it takes a while to do that. And so we can't maybe be nimble in every, and we need to be deliberate, certainly, but where we can be, we should be. And there are places, I think, on a college campus where we can be more nimble, and we just don't think that way always. That's the first thing that I would think of.
Thank you.
I think we need to change the structure of admissions offices. I had some experience with this when I was at Carthage, but you know, we often hire very new graduates, maybe it's their first job, to work in the admissions office. And then we want them to have these really sophisticated conversations with parents about this huge investment. I'll speak for myself, when I started working in admissions, I was talking about an investment. I didn't even own a car at that time. I lived in an apartment. I didn't have very many expenses. I wasn't a very credible source as I look back on that. And yet that is still the common practice, is that we hire young, energetic, recent graduates. And that the tension there is because they're willing to travel as much as admissions people travel. More established people often aren't as willing to do that. And so we've got this challenge. But when I was at Carthage, we hired people from sales who had proven sales experience. And I know that sometimes is a bad word, but it really worked well. And some of those people are still working there, but it gave them great credibility when they were trying to have these conversations with families about the investment of a college education.
Thank you.
Other thoughts?
Hi, this is Paul Hilmer. I came a little late to the discussion today. Sorry about that. One of my areas of responsibility is the arts, and when you were talking about moving away from merit-based scholarships, this is an area that's problematic for them because these are students who are used to auditioning by singing or submitting artistic work, something along those lines. So is there any room to continue that practice to attract the kind of student that expects to be able to gain access to financial aid through audition?
No, and I'm not sure what I said to make you feel like we were going away from merit. I think we're all in the merit world, and for example, here we do fine arts scholarships as well. We offer them, and I wouldn't back away from those. I think that merit scholarships, including competitive kinds of scholarships like that, are important in today's market. I just think that we may move away from it somewhere as an industry, and back to already hearing some versions of this, colleges saying we're not going to do merit anymore, we're going back to need-based aid. So that scares me a little bit for the same reasons you're articulating.
Right. Well, my bad, I came late, so thank you.
Sorry, I might have said something certainly.
Well, Brenda, on behalf of all of us, we want to thank you for spending time and your expertise with us. It's greatly appreciated.
Yes, indeed.
Folks, if you want to review this, I'll have the slides and the recording posted, hopefully within a few days. But Brenda, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda.
You're welcome.